Hello and welcome to the Michael Chekhov Masters Talk. I am Lisa Dalton, president of the National Michael Chekhov Association, and I am here with Sara Lovett. And Sara is going to tell us more about herself. Sara?
Okay, sure. So I just graduated from Pacifica Graduate Institute with my master's degree in Somatic Psychology. And I'm going on for my PhD. My bachelor's is a fine arts in acting. So my dissertation question came back to that acting focus. So my question is in regards to embodiment practices. Do embodiment practices aid in the self-care of the actor? Do actors engage specifically in a practice such as body mapping or yoga, meditation, anything that can help them take themselves from being in that place of performance back into their sense of self? Because as we know through neuroscience, that emotions and memories are all held in the body. And so we have all that going on just as ourselves, but the actor's unique in that he or she takes on the other. So then we are engaging in emotions and memories which are not necessarily ours. So that's going on top of us. And if it's an exceedingly dramatic, impassioned, or over emotional role, how do we then step away from that and come back into just the knowledge of who we are in ourselves? So my question is regarding embodiment practices. So one of the curiosities that I have is in why actors choose specific training programs that they do, such as Chekhov or Meisner or Stanislavski or whichever Udhagen, whoever it is that they've chosen, and that's who they're working with, why they've chosen that. And does it not only aid in how the actor approaches the work, but does it also aid the actor in terms of his own personal care? And is there a piece of that within Michael Chekhov? I know very little about it. I spoke with Gail Cronauer, and she gave me a half an hour intensive breakdown, and I've got the book which I'm harrowing through, which is a wonderful book. So that's my curiosity, and the research that I'll be doing, which will be in about a year from now, and hopefully we will be performing again by then in some capacity. We'll be working with 4 to 6 actors through the process of performance to see if the embodiment practice that specifically engage with pre-performance, during performance, and post-performance has a different outcome on their self-care from how they've typically engaged with a performance before. So that's just a little background for me.
Wow, thank you. That's great. So let me launch into a couple of things. First, just to talk about how actors, from my perspective, seem to choose how to train. And my own background comes from, I would say, from the Washington, D.C. area to New York for 12 years, to Los Angeles for 18, and then to Texas for the last 14. And as I look at who studies what, there are several factors. First is if they've gone to an educational environment, an institutional academic environment, they have studied what they've been told to study.
Right.
And if they're in a professional environment, they're studying by and large based on the marketing of the individual teacher and the reputation. And that reputation rises or falls upon star actors naming those teachers, or those teachers naming those star actors. Mm-hmm. So we go all the way back to Lee Strasberg, who, if you were who had a publicist sitting beside him in every class. And if you attended one class then and subsequently had any success, then you were attached publicly to his teaching. And anyone who admired you then went to his teaching, because he, in attaching your stardom to his name, took credit for your talent. And the biggest example we have of that, two examples we have of that, are Marilyn Monroe and Jimmy Dean. So if you went into a Strasberg Institute in Hollywood, certainly you would see foam board, life-size or larger than life-size cutouts of Marilyn and James Dean. And James Dean and Marilyn were both major Michael Chekhov advocates, and were forced to study with Lee when they were in New York. And Marilyn didn't begin to study with Lee Strasberg until 1956. So anything that came out effectively before 57 was more likely to be under Michael Chekhov's influence than Lee Strasberg's. And Marilyn Monroe, in fact, left Mrs. Chekhov in her will. And I mean, it was a serious relationship that Marilyn and Michael Chekhov had. Now, Jimmy Dean and Michael Chekhov died on the same day. But I spoke with Martin Landau, who's sort of a dyed-in-the-wool actor studio person, and he was Jimmy's roommate. And Martin Landau told me Jimmy was all about Michael Chekhov. And he really did only get up in Strasberg's class only one time, and he was so humiliated he never got up in class again. So marketing has a tremendous amount to do with the choices, and so that's a really big thing. We saw a large influx of the Meisner technique in the 70s as a result of Sanford Meisner's overall studio, the Neighborhood Playhouse, becoming the major alternative to the Strasberg Institute in New York. So if you did not want to go into the effective memory personal recall process, your only option for a full 2-year conservatory, if you had money, you went to the Neighborhood Playhouse. You could go to Stella Adler, though it was less available. And or if you didn't have a whole lot of money, which was my case, you went to HB Studios, where Uta Hagen was. And Uta Hagen's technique, which became a standard basic technique, was developed by Uta when she became a teacher for her husband, Herbert, who was teaching Michael Chekhov, who was a student of Michael Chekhov. And his classes became so successful, he needed more teachers. Uta herself was not not a teacher. She was a star, but he said, just teach what you do. And her work came basically because she was, it came as a result of being led into teaching by the demand that her husband's work brought forward. Stella Adler herself was told by Stanislavski to find Michael Chekhov, that he was really the next step, that he had taken the work where Stanislavski himself could not. And we know Stanislavski could not take the work where Chekhov did, because Stanislavski was under the Soviet restrictions and censorship. So we know that Stanislavski was under house arrest for the last 4 or 5 years of his life. And so he was literally had a guard in his house. And so Stella did find Michael Chekhov in 1935 and found him on the same day that Beatrice Straight and Deirdre Hurst Dupre found Michael Chekhov. And both of them tried to invite him to teach for them. And he went with Beatrice Straight and trained in Dartington, at Dartington Hall. So but Stella was still passionately interested in Michael Chekhov. And because I worked with Mala Powers, who was the executor of Michael Chekhov's estate and privately coached by him, and the only movie star who went on to be a teacher, Mala had information no one else had, and relationships. So when Stella passed away, Stella's daughter sent Mala, and we unpacked 2 boxes this size of notes from Stella on Michael Chekhov.
Wow.
And so, and also John Abbott, who was a British actor who helped Michael Chekhov bring his work out in Hollywood. He created the audio recordings that now exist on Theater and the Art of Acting. And he recorded Mr. Chekhov, and he had those reel-to-reels in his basement in Hollywood. And Stella wanted copies. He said that he wouldn't give her copies, but she could come over anytime she wanted and sit in his basement and listen. And he said she must have written down every word he said on 11 tapes at least 10 different times per tape. So she was deeply permeated by Michael Chekhov's work. So, and Meisner, in his introduction of his book, references Michael Chekhov as being an inspiration to him and teaching him that truth, as in naturalism, is far from the whole truth. And he wanted that too. So you look at the major systems that came out and became very popular. And so you have the basic method, you have Stella, you have Uda, and you have Meisner, and all of them have sources that lead back to Michael Chekhov's work, but none of them capture the full expanse of what he himself had. And none of them began as teachers. None of them began none of them began their early careers looking through the lens of learning. And we see from Michael Chekhov's autobiographies that he began to witness the successes and failures of actor teaching in his first studies in St. Petersburg at the Suvorin School, where he observed that the teaching process of acting was in fact not the thing that was inspiring him to raise to the top of the field. What was inspiring him was not listening to what they taught, but observing what they actually did, because there was a difference. And so when you look at a technique and you think of its originator, and you see an actor first who goes through his entire life observing the teaching, and indeed used teaching to get over a severe psycho-spiritual crisis that he had during the Russian Revolution, and found a spiritual path out of that and began weaving teaching acting with a spiritual path and never veered from that. You come up with a technique that is extraordinarily different from anything else that exists. And it is it deals with the very soul and spirit of the actor as a primal, absolutely primal function. It deals with helping people become healthier and happier human beings. I mean, he used this term happy, that he was trying to help people become happy on the stage. And a central tenet to this is that the character objectively exists. And that means that it exists outside of oneself. And when the work of art exists outside of oneself, it is very much like the beings that haunted Mozart in music, or that
Mm.
haunted Michelangelo or Da Vinci in design or whatever. They're ideas that exist, images that exist in another realm. And what the artist does, independent of the form of the art, is become a conduit that whose physical body expresses, who takes the spirit, the inspiration, the inspiration, right, and gives it physical form through their body, one way or another, through manipulating the instrument, manipulating the materials, or manipulating the body, as is the art of the singer and the actor and the dancer. So, uh, so when a technique begins with the belief in some intangible or invisible force, you have then to look at the psychology of those artists to whom this concept appeals, and to those who do not wish to engage in the intangible, invisible realm of spirit. So there are people who live who in sort of a psychological metaframe that is about being safe in reality versus safer in pretend. And I have an article in a new book coming out on Michael Chekhov and Sanford Meisner, Collisions and Convergence in Actor Training, where I speak very specifically about this distinction in this metaframe of being safest in reality versus safest in pretend. Everyone will fall into that, and it's in the same way that we're going to fall into our basic, fight, flight, freeze, fold kind of reaction to danger. We will all, and it's a separate thing, but it's a metaframe like that we all have a predominant in one area. So our default mechanism will be run or freeze or fold. And like in nature, each different thing, the turtle, comes like this, and that's its protective mechanism, while the lion is going to, attack, the deer is going to run, the possum's going to freeze, and that's their protective mechanism. So in this frame for the artist, if you're safest in reality, you want to believe that you're really that character. But if you're safest in pretend, you want to pretend that you are that character. And all the basic popular techniques out there, except for Michael Chekhov, are reality based. So in effective memory recall, you're recalling your personal realities. And of course, from a psychological perspective, we know those are all very, very subjective. You come into a room and an event happens and you have 20 different opinions of what actually happened. So our memories are very subjective, and they morph over time. And they morph based on the content of the current cognition, meaning who you are today and how you view the memory alters the memory. So every time you extract a memory, you look at it and it merges with present content and restores. So that process of recalling personal memories, it continually alters them. And this is where the severe danger enters with that technique for the artist. Because if they don't have bad memories and they think they need them, then they will create them. They will take memories that weren't actually so bad and make them worse, or they will actually create life experiences so that they have that pain, a personal level of pain to work with. And this again it can be very, very dangerous. But because the fear of not being successful is so great and the desire to perform is so powerful, the uninformed and uneducated artist thinks they have no option. They think that the option is some kind of relatively externally based thing,
Mhm.
uh, or a deeply internally personal psychology based thing. In Meisner, it's me, my lower self, my everyday personality without a social filter, being trained to respond to whatever I perceive
Right.
from just you. And in Michael Chekhov's world, the idea is that we can invite the artistic moment to, in effect, descend upon us or permeate us for a temporary time. And we train our body psychophysically to house that, to reflect the impulses that the images stimulate. And when we're done, we release them, clear them, and send them back into that sphere of creativity where they're accessible, very much like if you have a computer and you download a whole bunch of files and you never store them, your storage unit, your computer will crash. This is what is happening to actors' bodies. They're not releasing the artistic experience, and they're attempting to accumulate through their living, everyday living, all the experiences they think they need to have as artists. And they don't. They don't need to have had any experiences. We see children at very, very early ages who are playing out, and they turn on the story and they turn off the story, and they take a time out of the story and ask a question about, what are my powers? What are your powers? What are your vulnerabilities? Oh, yes. Well, you're not getting me enough, so I need to be more vulnerable. Okay. So I'm going to be, this way. Okay. Okay. Ready? Go. And they jump right back in. So there's no biological need for time to transition. If somebody calls you today and says you want $1 million, you're not going to say, excuse me a moment, I need to recall when I last felt that happy. No, the transition will occur instantly. The same with a disaster. You don't ever need to recall your own personal pain to have a completely instantaneous shift. The shift will occur. So as soon as the shift is made, so as soon as it can be released. Like a boxer, when the bell rings, full force, bell rings again, complete release. This is a highly efficient use of the human energies. And most people who experience the Chekhov technique feel extremely vitalized in working with it. You learn, I've got this chart behind me, and we go through all the different basic energy patterns that, and we start with the ones that an infant experiences. The most basic, coming out of the womb from this contracted position, coming out into the world. And we go through the elements of earth, water, air, and light. And we go through the basic impulses you experience in the womb, where you push and you pull and you suck. And so all of those impulses are intuitive and have been shut down somatically. We've eliminated certain expressions of these elements. And once we restore them, they become the basis of for all expression of all other images. And it was my experience that there were, what Mr. Chekhov himself was teaching, his, or as it was given to me, I studied with more direct students of Michael Chekhov than anyone in the world. And so I got it from many, many different directions. And I've studied subsequently with many teachers from around the world with many different interpretations. I saw that people were not always freeing themselves from these powerful movements. And so I became very, very focused on it, and really made it part of the way I teach, that and made it very, very clear that you want to be able to cross a threshold, step into the artistic space, and be able to step out, or bring the character to you and clear it. And sort of the cherry on Chekhov's cake, the psychological gesture, is a movement which is done in one breath, in one inhale, one exhale, with a full-bodied expression of a gesture that encapsulates the imaginary body, the physiology of the character, and the character's thoughts, feelings, and desires.
Mm-hmm.
And it anchors into you in one breath.
Mm-hmm.
And I have developed applications of this for human health and development, where you work with the wounds, your personal wounds, and you create a gesture for that. And then you work with the techniques that you've been using to adjust, modify, and avoid dealing with wounds. And then you create a gesture of your healed self, and you morph from the wound into the healed self, and you replicate that process until your body somatically feels safe in releasing the wound, and knows a new, movement pattern, and can hold the actual energy of a healed self.
Yeah.
So these are, I hope this is helpful with understanding that marketing, most actors choose a path because they're marketed to it, and not because they've experienced the others. And so they need to understand, especially if they have any sort of kinesthetic inclinations, any sort of imaginative processes, that there is a pathway through that. And you can actually take Michael Chekhov's work and use it to do Strasberg or Meisner or Uda or Stella or whoever, to do those techniques more safely and more fully.
Yeah. That was absolutely wonderful. When you were talking just now about your work with taking the wound and giving a gesture, that reminds me of Pat. Are you familiar with Pat Ogden's work with trauma?
I'm not.
That might be an interesting book for you to read. She's more a psychotherapist. I think she's a Jungian, but it's about, her work is about like, if I was in a place of the wound was I didn't get to express this motion, I just went inside. That gesture is what heals the wound, which is what I was thinking of when you were talking about that. You referenced something I just wanted to hear a little bit more about. You said we release and send them back, and that is through the physical gesture, the breath.
Mm-hmm, yes. So we literally sort of do a gesture of peeling it off and packing it up and sending it up, kind of like you would close a file on your computer and send it back to the cloud.
Nice. I love that ritual.
Yeah. And it's very nice. You can like keep a little tether in your imagination if you're playing this part night after night after night, right. And this process becomes almost automatic. Eventually you just can shorten, use a little gesture as an anchor for that clearing process.
Right.
But we begin with that full, literally, let's, if it's on us or in us or around us, and as an ensemble in the group, we take the work, we bring this creative spirit of the class in the opening, and then we pack it up and send it out, in the end. So the ritual is theater comes out of ritual. So, it goes back to its very, very roots.
Right. One of the other things that I think, just from the research that I've done so far on artists and their susceptibility to depression and suicide being 4 times as high as anyone else, is that I think, and I know this was true for myself as a young actor, is that there's no focus, especially in the training program I went through. I don't know if they've changed now, but the focus in training is all about who are you and it's not about who am I. So the actor's inability to know their own story, I think, impacts their ability to shift, to go through that ritual, to have that thread. Because if I don't know how I'm telling my own story, how am I going to tell someone else's? And that's when I think it compacts in the body as well.
You know,
So,
if I may jump in for a moment, Mr. Chekhov's technique is a path to self-knowledge, because the primary question, like for each time you ask a character, what is the character's relationship to expansion, contraction, or molding, flowing, flying, radiating, or thinking, feeling, willing, you must begin with what is mine.
Good.
So the Chekhov's question would be, how does your personal expanding and contracting relationship differ, and where does it align with your characters? You have to know your own relationship to the concepts. And then he says, once you know what's the same and you know what's different, as an artist, you focus on what's different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because what's the same ain't broke, we could say today.
Right.
You play the transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And every character you play has a private gift for you as a human.
Right.
It brings you a certain spiritual balancing, health balancing opportunity, even if it's just for an audition.
Right.
So that there's a very high level of awareness of this as a path of self-knowledge and a path of healing.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And there's an invitation to be conscious that that's your offer to your audiences as well.
Mm.
That it's an opportunity for their self-knowledge and their healing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also curious about the words spirit and soul and how you're defining those.
So I think because we had a delay, we're going to need to continue this.
Oh, okay.
Because that's a big question. I really want to answer it, but I have another session starting in 5 minutes.
Okay. Yes.
And I love this question. And just in the short, I will say that spirit contains the individual higher ego self.
Okay.
And the soul contains that feeling realm of the individual's thinking forces, feeling forces, and will forces as expressed in this incarnation.
Okay.
And
beautiful.
Yeah, that's the short.
And we didn't even get to talk to Joanne. I'd love to convene at another point. This would be wonderful. This has been so helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Sara, let's do it again, okay? And we can finish this conversation, and because I think Joanne's got a lot of thoughts too. Right, Joanne?
I love listening to you, though. I love this. This is awesome. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Sara, so much.
Thank you.
And we'll communicate and we'll create part 2.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.